Hello and welcome to the Fighting Spirit Podcast. As always, I'm Jason, and we're here to bring you the retrospective for Santos versus Teixeira, and we're going to look ahead to what is now Paul Felder stepping in for the injured Islam Makhachev to take on Rafael dos Anjos in what will be a phenomenal 155-pound bout. But let's talk a little bit about last week. So Santos Teixeira, we nailed the main event, went 5-5 overall, 1-1 on the Patreon. We were okay, there were a couple fights that could have went our way that just didn't. Is what it is. Let's get into it though. Here's the show. Alright, so as I said earlier, we did hit the main event with Glover Teixeira defeating Thiago Santos, and the tale of this one is what Glover can do on the mat, and how Thiago just couldn't quite close the door. But it's not really his fault. I mean, Glover's got a chin made of granite, and he was able to eat all the big shots. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Thiago just couldn't quite shut the door on him, and his opportunity in the third round and ended up getting choked out after I think he kind of wore himself out a little bit. Fight starts out pretty good, Thiago Santos catches Teixeira, and Teixeira ends up bringing it to the mat. Second round again, bringing it to the mat, almost closing the door with a rear naked choke in the end of the second round. If you maybe had an extra 5-6 seconds, he could have pulled that off, but then obviously ends up getting it done in the third. So he is set up for a title shot. Thiago Santos thinks he choked a little bit, and honestly, he could have won. He could have easily knocked out Teixeira. It was razor thin. He was kind of lucky that honestly Herb Dean was there and let a vet like Teixeira fight his way out of a bad situation, but this thing definitely could have gone either way. It just so happened that Teixeira did end up shutting the door in the third round, after I think Thiago honestly just looked a little bit gassed. And Dominic Cruz said this on the broadcast. After you have that knee surgery, after you have that reconstructive surgery, you have to wait to go back to grappling. That's the last thing you can go back to because of how hard it is on the body, and it ended up shaking out that way for Santos, where he did not look all that capable on the ground. And it's not that he doesn't have the black belts, he doesn't have the experience, he just has ring rust, I think, for that level of high-level grappling, and so things just did not pay off for him. But we ended up getting that one right, so it was a good mark for us. In the next one, we did end up getting incorrect. Andrei Arlovski defeats Tanner Boser. Tough one in this one. Boser outstrikes him about 2-1, 68-34, so exactly 2-1. However, Arlovski nails bigger power shots through the course of the fight, and most of the strikes for Boser were leg kicks. I don't know, kind of a tough one here. I think it could have been a draw, honestly, in a lot of ways, even though I don't like draws. Draws are kind of the same thing here. They're basically losses, but this was a fight that really was close, and I don't know if it was a straight-up unanimous decision for Arlovski, who, like I said, did land the power shots, but never at any point really hurt Boser to the point where I thought, maybe they had done more damage than Boser did overall. Either way, though, we don't make the calls around here for the fights. We just pick them beforehand, and in this one, we get it wrong with Boser picking up a loss, but really a razor-thin fight on that one. The next one, Ronnie Barcelos dismantles Khalid Taha, outstrikes him nearly 3-1, scores the takedowns, looks phenomenal. Couldn't quite shut the door, but the guy was explosive, a lot of fast-twitch muscle fibers out there, and this is a guy that we have to watch out for. Bantamweight, he looks really good, explosive, dangerous everywhere, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Barcelos come back. That was a phenomenal contest and one we got right. Another one we got correct, Giga Chikadze defeats Jamie Simmons. This one I think was a foregone conclusion. Simmons making his debut against Chikadze, and honestly, it's just a tall order for a guy. He demonstrated his kickboxing nicely, scoring a nice kick KO and shutting the door late in round number 1. So hats off to him. He picks up a phenomenal win, and I would like to see some tougher competition. I believe also Jamie stepping in was a late replacement, so just did not work out for him. And the next one we got correct as well. Yan Xiaojian defeats Claudia Gadelha. This one was a tough fight. Gadelha, she did score takedowns, but she didn't score enough of them, I think, to cement any rounds. She didn't do anything really with them. There was no real threat on the ground from her, and she got basically boxed up all night, with Yan looking very decisive with her point-style striking, not really putting enough into it to knock Gadelha out, but putting on a clinic of quality striking overall and cruising into a unanimous victory. Now, unfortunately, we get a couple wrong here. Things start to slide for us just a little bit. We have Trevin Giles defeat Bevan Lewis. This fight looked close to start. I thought Bevan looked good to start, but he ended up picking up an L for us, and this is one of our calls on Patreon. it was this one as well as Romanov that is next. And Alwyn Allen we had on the Patreon as well going up against Strickland. But that fight moves to next week, so we actually will be covering that one again. The pick hasn't changed, but it'll be moving to later on in the show. Anyways, Trevor Giles defeating Bevan Lewis, knocks him out in the third round. I think he was going to cruise into a unanimous decision anyhow, but his wrestling is striking all better than Lewis, and Lewis, I think, a little bit underperformed on Saturday. Unfortunately, he did not pick up a win for us, but it is what it is. In the next one, really solid wrestling, and honestly, everything out of this heavyweight. Alexander Romanov defeats Marcos Rogério de Lima, a solid vet in the sport. Romanov just looked really solid, was able to pick up a forearm choke, I think one of the first ever in the UFC. Afterwards, he was put on a clinic of takedowns for his cornerman. Fun guy to watch, explosive for his size, high-level grappling, wrestling. Guy could go far in the division because he has the skill set to do it. He's also undefeated, so he's got that going for him as well. So Alexander Romanov, keep an eye on that guy at heavyweight. I could see him taking on some good comers in the next few months here. So we get that one correct. Then in the last three, we get these all incorrect. Darren Elkins defeats Eduardo Garagori. I thought Garagori was going to win this one despite Elkins' 7 takedowns. But hey, when you get 7 takedowns, you can definitely cruise your way to victory for sure. But I thought Garagori looked better on the feet. It's just that Elkins was able to, submit, get his will in to score takedowns. But anyways, he ends up picking up a rear naked choke, so it's not even a question of decisions and judges anyways. He definitely snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Elkins looked pretty banged up. Garagori, I thought, was the superior striker in that one, but he ended up losing, and so it is what it is. Between that one and the Arlovsky fight, I think we could have done a little bit better, but hey, you don't get to pick how the outcomes are. And then the last two, Max Griffin and Ramiz Bramaj. We had this one, Max Griffin ended up picking up a win. He scored a knockout in the third round. I think he was going to win anyways. Bramaj did not look as good as Griffin did. Griffin certainly fought to a higher level than we've seen him most recently. And then in the last one, Gustavo Lopez defeats Birchak. This was a debut fight for us, but we get this one wrong. We picked Birchak. Ended up getting choked out early on or midway through round number 1. So, like I said, 5-5. We struggled to start the night. That happens a lot when you go with these stats here. For this week coming, I'm kind of shuffled some guys that aren't making their debut but had such short or really indecisive wins or losses in the UFC. We kind of shifted them over to the debut metric and out of the normal metric when we have more data because just some of the stats just didn't look quite right. Like we're going to talk about Chaos Williams. His numbers are just too ridiculous with his one win in the UFC. We're going to get into that one. I don't want to preview it too much here. In fact, let's get into it. Here are the fight picks. All right, so like I said earlier, we did kind of change the metric around a little bit, and then the metric itself actually didn't change. It's just the way I was judging fights. So for the Chaos Williams fight or Caitlin Williams fight, moving that one to the debut statistics as opposed to the regular statistics because his numbers are just off the chart. I don't think they're trustworthy yet, and did that for a couple other fights on here where I think we just kind of needed to take them out of the main metric because of their outlier statistics. So just keep that in mind. I'll let you know where those are and if they are debut fights. They'll always be at the end of the show. Anyways, let's talk about the main event for this week because it was honestly just announced. It is going to be Paul Felder versus Rafael dos Anjos in what should be a barn burner of a fight. I mean, both these guys are veterans at 155 pounds, and it's going to be a close one. Obviously, the striking game, I think we got to hand off to Paul Felder here, and from the grappling perspective, you got to give it to dos Anjos. The numbers reflect this in the way they've won. 10 submissions over 29 wins for dos Anjos and 10 knockouts over 17 wins for Felder. So this is going to be a question. Can Paul Felder keep it off the ground? Can he stay away from a grappling affair? It's going to be hard to say. He is picking up this fight on a late notice, but we got to bear in mind Arnold Allen, right? Alwyn Allen, we're going to talk about later here, also trains over at Rufus Sport, would have been training for this fight, and so he probably has been working with him over at Rufus Sport, and I would assume that he's going to be ready. I don't know if he's going to be in, full fight camp shape. We can never make those promises with these guys, but on pure statistics, I like Paul Felder here, regardless of all of the late-breaking information on it, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think Felder can get it done here. Now, dos Anjos has struggled in his last 2 outings. Granted, he did get a win over Kevin Lee, but he's 1-4 over his last 5. Covington, Usman, Edwards, and Chiesa that he all lost to. Bear in mind also, he did go up to 170 pounds for a time, so some of this, information is from his 170 pound days. Now he's back at 155, taking on the very competent Paul Felder, who has looked really good as well. I mean, in his fight against Dan Hooker, he looked really good. He could have won that one. It was a split decision. He got a split decision win against Barboza, obviously James Vick, but I mean, who's not really beat James Vick, and then he got a split decision loss to Mike Perry. He's had some razor close ones out there. He knocked out Charles Oliveira back in 2017. I mean, if you're a grappler and you're just going to rely on your grappling, Felder can put you to sleep, as we saw when guys like Charles Oliveira. And I'm not saying he's going to knock out Dos Anjos. I don't think Dos Anjos has a glass jaw, if you will. He's only been knocked out 3 times over his 42 fights that he's had. So he's not he's not narcoleptic out there, if you get what I'm saying. But either way, I like Felder here. I think his striking is going to be able to pay off. I think it's going to pay dividends against Dos Anjos, who has struggled at times here. He's just looks good recently despite his split decision losses in the last couple of them, and he's still beating really high caliber competitors like Barboza and was so close to beating Vic. I think we got to go with the Irish Dragon in this one. He's our pick. All right, moving on to our co-main, we're going to have Abdul Razak Al-Hassan, Judo Thunder, taking on Kalen Kayas Williams. And in this one here, honestly, it's really hard to say. He looks so phenomenal against Alex Morono. I mean, he got a quick 27-second knockout that it's really hard to judge him in the UFC off of that, one fight. Whereas Al-Hassan has, far greater number of UFC fights. He's been fighting in the UFC since, 2016. He's gone, 1, 2, 3, 4. He's got 4 and 2 over his 6 in the UFC. Granted, he did lose his last one back in July, but I think the Judo Thunder Master is going to be able to come out and take on Kalen Williams and prove why he has so many decisive early knockouts in the UFC. He had 3 knockouts in a row, Sabah Homsi twice, then again Nico Price. Granted, he did run into an issue with Monir, but I think he's going to be able to bounce back in this one. This guy is such a high-level mixed martial artist. I think he's a little bit underrated. He took Omari Akhmedov, who is a phenomenal fighter, to a split decision loss. And, honestly, I just think he's going to be able to do it here. We just haven't seen enough out of Williams. And despite his explosive efforts early on here in his career, I don't think he's going to get it done here. It is going to be a close one. I don't know what kind of high probability I can assign to Abdul, but I do like him in this one. I think he has the striking that can go toe-to-toe with Williams. I see this primarily being a stand-up fight, and I'm going to stick with the slight edge of experience here and a little bit with the age, because we have Al-Hassan at 35 years of age. He may be dipping soon, but he should still be able to ride the tail end of his prime here to at least one more W. So we're going with Judo Thunder in this one. All right, the next one here, we're going to have a pretty solid fight. We're going to have these guys kind of flying under the radar for what it's worth, too. Julian Marquez, the Cuban Missile Crisis, taking on Saperbek Safarov. And in this one here, honestly, I really like Marquez. I think that he has looked good thus far in the UFC. Granted, we've only seen him a couple of times, and he did have a split decision loss to DeCircio, but he came out strong in both the Dana White Contender Series and against Darren Stewart, picking up a submission victory for a guy that, had just has the 6 knockouts over 7 wins, picking up a rear naked choke against a guy like Darren Stewart, a guillotine choke against Darren Stewart that's so dangerous. I think speaks volumes to this guy. Now, Safarov also a little bit green. He's only 9-3, and we have seen him struggle a little bit. And his UFC outings, he's 1-3, and I don't know if he's really fit for the competition level here. We've seen great stuff out of Julian. Granted, he did a split decision loss, but he's proven he can do it under the big lights, and I think he'll be able to get a win here. We're going with Julian Marquez in this contest. All right, moving on to the next one here. We talked about this one last week. I'm just kind of reiterate here. Brandon Allen Allen's going to be taking on Sean Strickland. And in this one here, I really like Allen Allen, a Rufus Sport product, training with Felder. Hasn't lost since he was in LFA against Anthony Hernandez. He's been cruising since he got into the UFC. Has had nothing but stoppages up until the Kyle Dockhouse fight, including a Dana White Contender Series. The guy looks phenomenal, and I think his record is only going to grow. He's only 24 years old, and I think he's got a lot ahead of him. Now, Sean Strickland's 29 years old. He's got a lot more fights, not about a lot more, but a few more fights under his belt. He's 21-3, and he's looked good himself, but he has struggled a little bit off and on. He has lost some really good competition, though. Kamaru Usman, Zaleski Dos Santos, and he's beaten great guys like Jack Marshman and Nordine Talib. But honestly, I think Allen is a hot prospect right now. I think the stats shake out for him for what we've seen thus far with him in the UFC. UFC. I like his camp. I like him. I think he's got it. All in Allen. I'm going all in too. He's the pick. All right, the next one here, I just want to make a note of. Daniel Rodriguez does not have a fighter to go against right now in his bout, so this one is likely to drop off the card. I haven't heard anything recently. Sherdog isn't showing it. Fight Metric isn't showing it. None of the usual suspects are showing it, so I'm thinking this one is called off. But just note that it is still on the fight card right now, so something could happen. I know it's not going to be on the show, but if it does, I will pick a winner for that one if it does come out. Let's move on to the next one, though. Antonio Arroyo versus Eric Anders. This one here is going to be an interesting fight. Now, the reason I say interesting here is because as much as I love your boy here, I think he always underperforms a little bit. I have never really been that impressed by Eric Anders. He had 3 losses in a row back in 2018, 2019. He came back well, defeat Vinceus Castro, looked okay against Mearshart, lost to Jotko. I thought he was going to be on this fight streak. The guy is off and on, and I don't know where he is in his mental state to take on this fight, because Antonio Arroyo is also a guy that we've seen go off and on recently, right? This guy hadn't lost since 2017. Has his first fight in the UFC. Bang, picks up a loss. Now, I don't know if it was just under lights issue. He performed so well in Dana White Contender Series. This one is really hard for me to make a pick on. The numbers honestly shake out for Arroyo, but we haven't really seen much out of him, and we've seen a lot out of Anders. So the statistical pool is richer for Anders, and it's less so for Arroyo, and it's honestly hard to see how this one's going to play out, but I'm going to stick with my call of Arroyo on this one. I think going to unanimous decision, there's at least that whole 15 minutes. It wasn't a quick outage, and I think Arroyo's going to be able to bounce back from it and prove why he belongs in the UFC against a guy that we have seen go off and on, whereas Arroyo had that great streak going through 2017 and 2019. So I think he'll go back to his winning ways. I think he'll close out 2020 with a win. We're going with Arroyo. All right, this next one here is very, very green fighters. We have 2 21-year-old women, Kay Hansen taking on Corey McKenna, the Hobbit. So this one is just really interesting because we don't have a lot to go on. McKenna's 5-1, trains over at Team Alpha Male. We have Hansen, who is 7-3, trains over at 10th Planet, and obviously has some great grappling with that kind of pedigree. And it's really hard to say. Both these women have only had 1 fight in the UFC thus far, but for what we actually know, not even one in the UFC for Kay Hansen. We just have the Dana White Contender Series. But in this one here, I honestly like McKenna. I think that she's going to be able to get it done here. I really like her grappling. I think she has the ability to shut the door. She's closed out 6 out of her 7 wins. She's been knocked out once, had 2 decision losses. But I think Hansen here, with her high-level grappling, is going to be going up against somebody who trains over at Alpha Male. They have a really wrestling-heavy camp, and I think if she gets a little confident about the takedowns, I think Kay Hansen is going to be able to capitalize on that and use her 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu to great effect to pick up a win here. But really, honestly, with both these women being 21 years old, having a really limited fight experience, it's hard to say, and this is technically a debut bout for Hansen, so just bear that in mind. I probably should have mentioned this really at the bottom of the show, but I was going along in order of the fight card and missed this one. So it's really a debut fight, just keep that in mind, but I am going with McKenna. All right, moving on. We have one more ladies bout here to talk about. We have Miranda Granger taking on Ashley Yoder. And in this one here, it is going to be an interesting fight. I think both these ladies match up very well. They're both fairly young. They're both kind of green still at this point, 7-6 and 7-1. And, that 7-6 record honestly is hard to overlook. So we're going to go with Miranda Danger Granger. She just looked really good on the ground. Granted, she did lose to Amanda Lemos in a fight that, we thought she had the grappling advantage, but Ashley Yoder has struggled so much. Lately she's has back-to-back losses here. Liviana Souza, Ronda Marcos. She did beat Suri Kondi, but that was a while ago, back in mid-2019, so it's been a while for her. I know she's also a little bit older, 33 years of age. It's hard for me to believe that she's going to start bouncing back now. I know it's a little negative of a thought, but I think that Miranda Granger just got caught off guard by Lemos, kind of overestimated herself. She's only 28 years old, 7-1. I think she's going to bounce back nicely. She's going to be the pick on Saturday. All right, this next one here I'm treating as a debut, but it's Alex Morono taking on Rice McKee. And in this one here, McKee took on Hamzat Chimaev in his debut, and, honestly, that's just a really tall order right now. I mean, we didn't really know about it all that much when he did fight him, but it was way too tall of an order. Rice McKee, solid fighter, 3 wins coming in off of Cage Warriors in a row. Solid looking guy, and I think honestly he's going to look solid against Morono in this one. Now, Morono did last lose to Cameron Williams, looked decent before that, wins over Kenyon Son, Zach Otto, and Max Griffin, but I think McKee is decent enough and good enough to honestly defeat Morono. He's got some real explosiveness, he has some really early knockouts back over in Cage Warriors, and I think that's going to be able to carry over. I think he just got derailed by Hamzat, and I believe that he will bounce back here. However, Morono is a solid competitor and has looked good in the past, but the numbers didn't shake out for him, so we're going with McKee. All right, this next one should be one of the more fun fights on the card. We have Alberto Quinones, or Jose Quinones rather, taking on Luis Smolka. Now, I love these guys. These are real fun fighters. And in this one, I really like Quinones. Now, we saw him, lose to Sean O'Malley back when O'Malley was riding the hype train high. But he's, got some solid UFC wins and experience. He beat Carlos Haushin, did lose to Nathaniel Wood, but I think he's going to be able to bounce back here. Smolka has struggled at times, lost to Matt Schnell, lost to Casey Kenny, and he's a really off and on kind of guy. I feel like I don't think he fights to his full potential. I like Smolka, but I don't think he's ever really going to rise to the challenge, and I still like Quinones here. I think he's got the fire down on the belly. I think he's got the statistics to back it up, and I think he's going to pick up a win on Saturday. All right, so our next one here will also be another ladies bout. We're going to have Ronda Marcos taking on Kanako Murata. And in this one here, I honestly like Murata. She looks pretty decent coming into the UFC here out of Invicta. Also fought in Rising quite a bit. I think she's a really hot product coming out of Japan. And despite not knowing a whole lot about her, we've seen Ronda Marcos struggle a bit. Lost to Durns, lost to Hebus, lost to Gadelia. Did defeat Ashley Yoder, but as we mentioned earlier, Yoder not the highest quality competition. So honestly, I think that she'll get a win in this one. She is going to be my pick on Saturday. And then in the last two here, we have Dontel Mays and Roque Martinez. In this one here, I'm treating like a debut bout because we had Martinez go out so quickly against Romanov. I don't like the numbers that he had. It wasn't really quickly, but I don't think he got to showcase himself entirely, so I'm going to leave him off the main statistic, go to the debut, and that's where I get Mays to pick up a win in that one. I think the guy has looked at least pretty decent recently, and I think he's able to do it. Granted, Martinez does have more experience, but Mays does hit hard, and despite his recent losses, I think we'll be able to bounce back. In this one, he looked good coming into the Dana White Contender Series. Then he was given a really tall order with Cyril Gahn and then Rodrigo Ferreira. I think this is a little bit more to his capabilities, so I expect him to get a win in this one. And then in the last one here to talk about, we have a fight between Tony Gravely and Geraldo Freitas. And in this one here, I like Freitas here. He looked really solid in his last fight, despite the loss to Chris Gutierrez. Was a split decision. He's 12-5, trains over at Novo União, so he's got really solid training, and I just like him. He just looked really good coming into the UFC, defeated Felipe Corrales, and I think he'll be able to bounce back in this one. Granted, Tony Gravely has looked okay as well. He did lose his last outing to Brett Johns after coming in off the Dana White Contender Series, so we haven't seen enough of him just yet, but I honestly think that we got to put the smart money on Geraldo in this one. So let's go over them one more time. So we're going to have Felder, Marquez, Arroyo, McKenna, Granger, Quinones, Freitas, Allen, McKee, Al Hassan, Murata, and Mays. I know the order is a little different there. Crunching the fights for this week, things were just always in flux with different fighters, going in and out, doing the main event later. So apologize for the order of that one, but I think the results will be pretty good overall. I think we can exceed last week. We had a couple of really tight ones. I think we'll be able to score a couple more here, and obviously we will be putting out on the Patreon our probability, our highest probability picks, and those betting tips there. So until I speak with you again next time, happy fight picking.